Welcome to this month's edition of Field Notes. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. This month's guest is Dave Eckmann, a senior principal with Magnuson Klemenchik Associates, also known as MKA, and is also one of this year's AISC Ideas 2 Awards judges. Thank you for joining us today, Dave.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
Well, here let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Well, actually, I've been a Chicagoan most of my life. I guess I'm one of those people where apple didn't fall too far from the tree. I was actually born and raised in a suburb of Chicago called Downers Grove, Illinois. It's about 25 miles outside of the city. And other than a couple years stint in the Indiana Dunes, a few years of living in the city of Chicago, and then a couple years of living in Seattle when I joined MKA. I should say, and then a couple months, I lived in Europe for 4 months when I was a recipient of a traveling fellowship. But besides that, I've spent my entire life in Downers Grove, and it's been a great place to live and raise a family.
Sure, and that's not far from the Morton Arboretum, right?
Absolutely, it's the next town over, and actually, when thinking about it, Downers Grove is home of many AISC colleages.
There are a few of us out there, yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. I have to ask, the Indiana Dunes, you lived in or around that area?
Yeah, so I was very, very young, so I just have vague memories of it. But my dad had been transferred out there for a project assignment for a couple of years, and we were in a small house along the lake, and Ogden Dunes there. And I just remember being a kid, being able to play in sand and build massive sandcastles.
Oh, that's perfect. I was going to say that is actually that's a great amenity when you're a kid. Sure.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit about how you decided that you wanted to be an engineer and/or an architect.
Well, yeah, I guess that goes back also to when I was a young boy. Always fascinated with building things, with all the Legos and the erector sets and kind of woodworking projects. And I also remember, being in my basement and drawing plans of my dream home, and design forts and make tables and boxes and things like that. So I was just always interested in building things. And my dad, who is a civil engineer, he practiced in water treatment side of things, but he always wanted me to be an engineer. But I was actually more interested in building vertically. So I thought I wanted to be an architect. So that's what I went to college to study. But when I was in school, I actually found myself gravitating more towards the math and science-based classes, the things that you have to take, statics and dynamics, strengths of materials, steel and concrete, all that kind of stuff. And I just realized that engineering was probably more in my wheelhouse and one of my strengths. So I decided to go that direction.
Sure. And so where did you study? Where did you go to school?
Well, I am a Fighting Illini. So I went to the University of Illinois down in Urbana-Champaign.
Okay. And so, speaking of both of, having an interest and a background in both of those disciplines, do you think having knowledge as an architect helps you as a structural engineer? And do you think if you were going back into architecture, would that the structural, engineering knowledge and experience help you as an architect?
Yeah. Well, let me just back up a second to tell you a little bit about the program and how I ended up where I did. So, the University of Illinois really has a great program where you can get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in architecture, but you specialize during the master's program. So you could specialize in design or in practice or history, anything like that. But one of the options was the professional option of structures, which is the direction that I went. And that allowed me to get qualified or get licensed as both an architect and a structural engineer, and that's exactly what I did. My real passion was in structural engineering, so that became my day job. And I actually spent the first 18 years of my career working in architectural engineering firms before I joined MKA 17 years ago. But as it relates to how my education helps me, I think it's really a fantastic education for what I do. My architectural education provided me with this really a great understanding of all the building systems and how buildings go together. My education allowed me to just better understand what architects are trying to achieve and how I could design the structure to better suit their needs and desires. And I think as a result of my education, I became a better collaborator than some of my other engineering counterparts that have a tendency to roll their eyes when there's creative or non-orthogonal ideas out there. I think what was also beneficial is that having an architectural education and license, it also gave me a bit more credibility in the architectural community and a little bit easier to collaborate with them because I was sort of one of them and not just taking a conservative approach, which is what many people think that engineers do.
Sure. No, I think right. I think people kind of a lot of times have preconceived notions about all engineers are like this or all architects are like this, and obviously that's not the case.
Right, right.
So you talked about Europe. Can you talk a little bit about, or go into a little bit of detail on your traveling fellowship and your study focus on structural influences in the design of great European architecture? And on top of that, let me know if you had any favorite structures. I mean, I'd like to hear steel structures, but just structures in general from that experience.
Yeah, well, I feel incredibly fortunate. I was a recipient of something called the PLIM Traveling Fellowship. It's offered by the University of Illinois School of Architecture, and it's awarded to a seasoned professional that's been out practicing for a while. And the objective is for that individual to go to Europe for a minimum of 4 months to study something related to architecture. And given my background as both a architect and engineer, I wanted to focus my studies on a topic called structural influences in the design of great European architecture. And I did that because I felt like the many European projects were on the front covers of the architectural magazines. And so I wanted a better understanding of how European architects and engineers collaborated, because they just seemed to be leading the way at the time. And so my objective was to go there and, see and touch as many projects as I could. But equally important to me was meeting with the architects and engineers that created these beautiful pieces of architecture. And again, trying to better understand how they collaborated. So I was all over the place. I was in 9 different countries, I think 56 cities. And I met with many of the leading architects and engineers or people from their staff to just try to better understand how they work. I was just exposed to a lot of things that just opened up my eyes, including one thing that I love now is just I was introduced to steel casting. So that's something that's really an interest of mine. But relative to your question about what were some of my favorite structures, there were a couple. Some of them were classics. Pompidou Center in Paris, Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano, Peter Rice from Arup, London, was the structural engineer on that. And while I'm thinking about it, every engineer should read Peter Rice's book, An Engineer Imagines. It's a great book that talks about his collaborations and his approach to engineering great architecture. So I found that to be really inspirational. Another classic, something like the Munich Olympic Facility by Friato, again, just really structural pieces of architecture, which I found to be beautiful. And so I did this fellowship back in around 2000. So I guess some of these more recent projects I'm going to mention are maybe a little bit older now too, but I really got intrigued and inspired by some of Santiago Calatrava's work. Maybe something like the Lyon Airport and railway station in Lyon, France. Again, just beautiful steel structure. And then was exposed to George Schlegel, unfortunately recently passed away, but some of the work of Schlegel, Bergman. And one project that just stood out for me in particular, because it's just so small but so beautiful, was just a lookout tower in Stuttgart, Germany. is beautiful, is delicate. It's just a pedestrian lookout in a park. And it was just this winding steel pathway to the top of the lookout. And it's this set of stairs just spiraled around a central steel slender column that had it terminated at the base in this beautiful steel casting. And this whole structure then was just stabilized by a mesh of steel cables. So just innovative solutions, interesting stuff, and all steel.
And it's and you, as you said, I mean, Pompidou Center, that's a big one, obviously, but and then you goes down to there. So I mean, it's really cool that you got to see it, like, yeah, at every scale, from massive to pretty small.
Yeah, it
That's
was a incredible experience.
Oh, I'll bet. I'll bet. Did you have a favorite city out of the, what did you say, 56 or so that you visited?
Oh, yeah, boy, it's I don't know that I had a favorite. Every country offers something unique and different. And I was moving so fast. When you're 56 cities in 4 months, sometimes I'd forget what room I was in because I've been in a different room number the night before. But again, if you haven't been there, or anybody that listens to this haven't spent time in Europe, you've got to go. It's incredible. And the architecture is amazing.
Well, I was going to say, so, once again, speaking about like the collaboration of architecture and engineering, you were a judge, one of our judges for our 2022 Ideas Awards, which of course focuses on that integration of architecture and engineering. We are going to be revealing the winners at NAACC later this month or in March. But I was just curious, we can't obviously talk about any of the projects right now, but can you think of any other steel buildings, maybe even past winners, or just things you've noticed throughout your experience that you feel are really good examples of illustrating successful integration between those two disciplines?
Yeah, integration. Yeah, for sure. Certainly there are some classics. I guess one that immediately comes to mind is, down the street from my office, which is the John Hancock Tower in Chicago. It's something that's very, I think it has a different name now, but it's very clean, simple, elegant structure where the lateral system for the building is integral to the architecture and expressed as part of the architecture. Um, Maybe something more modern is actually a project that we recently completed, which is the Amazon Spheres in Seattle. And I think it was a AIC Ideas Award winner, but it's a 5-story organic looking showpiece structure. And it's the perimeter structure form is the architecture, and which is created by this architectural shell of steel. And it's very complex form, but yet the sphere is comprised of these repetitive modules that could be mass produced and erected in such a way that it was, fairly cost effective. As cost effective as something that complex could be, but in a way, also in such an organic way that most people can't even see or find the repetitive pattern. So, I like it when architecture and engineering is seamless between the two, and when the structure can serve multiple purposes. So like in that case, the lateral system and the support of the skin, as well as the support for the vertical loads.
Sure. Yeah, that one I have not seen in person yet. I mean, the pictures look stunning. It looks like a massive, like multi kind of capsule terrarium of sorts. But yeah, and what's interesting, you pick both of those because that one is, so curved, so it's a very curvy project. And then you think of the Hancock Center, which is very, kind of angular and straight lines. The one thing when you said Hancock Center, before I ever moved to Chicago, I'd seen plenty of pictures of it, and I've driven by it. But then what I always realize is when you see it from the thin side, I actually like seeing it from that side more than the wide side, because you look at it from like the wide, I guess, what is it, the north and south, and it looks like a fortress. But when you look at it from, east or west, it's more elegant from that angle. It's an amazing building.
Yep, absolutely.
So okay, can you talk about some of your projects now, steel projects that you're perhaps most proud of? Maybe a couple, maybe one, that you really enjoy, but also that maybe pushed you to the limit. So like I said, maybe that's the same project. One that maybe drove you a little nuts, but at the same time you're the most proud of.
Okay, yeah, well, certainly a couple come to mind. Uh, First was one that was early in my career, called 100 North Riverside. Did that in the 1980s. Used to be for Morton Salt, and I think Boeing headquarters is in that building right now. I was working at Perkins and Will at the time, and had an interesting challenge in that portion of the building was constructed over the railroad tracks, active railroad tracks. So this 13-story segment of the building needed to be supported without columns that could touch the ground. So some of the columns went up, then there were trusses constructed above the roof, and those are exposed in the architecture. And then once those trusses were in place, we started hanging the columns and then inserting the floor plates to construct the building that's hanging over the tracks. What was kind of fun about that project is that we actually had it erected 3.5 inches out of plumb, such that when the columns were added and the framing was hung from the steel above the tracks, that it pulled the building back into vertical. So that was kind of a fun project in my backyard here too. A couple other ones in my backyard. A newer one is something called River Point Tower, and I guess sort of staying with that track of that theme of being by the train tracks. This was a 52-story office tower that I did when I was at MKA, and it's unique in that it's an elliptical plan, but at the base of the building, the columns slope inward, again to avoid tracks that were below the building if they were to come straight down. We actually took that idea and took it even further at the building right next door to it, which is called 150 North Riverside. And in that building, we had steel columns coming down, and they actually basically transferred into the core. And so the core is the only thing that touches the ground on that building. So there were some exciting projects, but probably the one that really pushed me to the limits is interesting in that it was a much smaller project, but it was quite unique and innovative. And that was the University of Chicago Ratner Athletics facility. I had the pleasure of working with world-renowned architect Caesar Pelli on that project, and it was basically a modern interpretation of Gothic architecture. So, it didn't have buttress walls, but it's sort of the idea of exposed structure. And in that particular project, it consists of these asymmetrically located steel masts that were comprised of tapered triangular form made up of 3, I think, 18-inch diameter HSS. And they supported these S-shaped roof beams that were over 100 feet long. And those roofs were over an Olympic-sized pool and a college gymnasium, probably seat 2,000 or 3,000 people. And that was done by hanging this roof from this asymmetrical mast with steel cables. And so these steel cables also splayed out in 3 directions. So it's kind of like all these fingers reaching out and holding that roof up over these large volume spaces. All steel, of course. We had long span deck that was spanning 25 feet in between these curved steel beams, and really interesting challenge too, because the cables were reaching out and they were all different lengths. So the forestay cable and the backstay cables, they needed to be tuned so that all the cables remained in tension under any loading condition. So it was quite a complex analysis. I think it ended up being a really beautiful building, but there were a few sleepless nights there throughout the design process.
So I want to keep the discussion going a little longer on high rises. I understand you're involved with the CCHRB, or the Chicago Committee on High Rise Buildings. So let me know a little bit about that organization. What's unique about it, and on top of that, what got you interested in skyscraper design in the first place?
Yeah, okay. Well, CCHRB, as you said, Chicago Committee on High-Rise Buildings, that actually started in the late 1960s, has a great history to it. It's when Fazler Khan, great structural engineer at SOM, along with a small group of architects, engineers, they're just trying to figure out how to design Sears Tower at that time, as well as other tall buildings at that time. And this group would get together once a month in a restaurant in a basement, actually, in Chicago, to kind of swap ideas and solutions that they're coming up with and challenges. And so that continued, and the group got larger. And today CCHRB consists of about 75 of Chicago's leading architects, engineers, developers, contractors, educators, vendors, a very diverse group. And they just continue to meet and to learn and to solve problems for the next generation of tall buildings. We work with the city of Chicago to help them with the codes and things like that. And actually, Charlie Carter, AISC's president, serves on that committee with me.
Right, and he doesn't live too far from you either, from what I understand.
That's right. He's about 4 blocks away from me. I see him walking his dog.
Wow, that's closer than I thought. No, that's great. And now that we're talking a little bit about Chicago, what do you obviously as a somebody who's born and raised here, what do you enjoy most about it? And maybe what's one of your favorite things to do here?
Well, this may sound crazy, especially at this time of year, but I really enjoy our 4 seasons. I wish one of them was a little bit shorter than the other seasons, but but I like those 4 seasons for sure. And I also really enjoy and appreciate the Chicago's unique skyline and its relationship to Lake Michigan. Actually, this summer, I had a fantastic experience. I tried something different. I enjoy boats and water, and I actually rented a yacht for the summer on Lake Michigan and took boating lessons and took friends out all over the lake, or along the shoreline anyway, throughout the summer. But one of the neatest parts for me was just taking this boat up the Chicago River and seeing, first, many of MKA's projects. I think we've got 19 of them that you can see there from the Chicago River. But just, the people watching and the sunsets reflecting off of the tall, beautiful buildings in Chicago. It was just really fantastic. Really, really enjoyed that experience. So wonderful.
I think you did it right, because what they always say about boats. I love the idea of having a boat, but they always say the 2 best days in your life are when you buy a boat and then when you sell it. But renting is a great idea, because you get the fun part of it.
That's exactly right.
No, that's great. But that's a great a great experience too. The idea of going up the river like that, because obviously you've got like they've got a whole a lot of architectural tours, so you can kind of do your own personal tour from your perspective as somebody with experience in designing buildings. That's excellent. And the other thing too, as of course you've seen, I haven't lived here my whole life, but in my time here within the last few years, they've really done good things with the Riverwalk. I think they finally decided, hey, let's make the river into an amenity, something that people can be drawn, close to. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, it's come a long way. There was a time when the river was dirty and all the buildings would turn their back to it, but now that's not the case. It's cleaned up. It's incredible, and as I said, with the people watching, just the riverfront that they've developed and the restaurants and the walks. It's just a great place to be in the summertime.
I understand you play the drums. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess ever since I was a small kid, that was always a dream of mine. I wanted to be a drummer in a rock band. So, one of the prerequisites to being able to even play drums in the school band was to take a couple of years of piano. So I did that reluctantly. I hated it, but I did my time and was finally able to sign up to play the little snare drum in the local school band. And then I kept practicing, and I was getting better. I played, the snare drum, and then moved into all percussion instruments. So I was playing marimba, xylophone, timpani, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it kept getting better. So I ended up being like first chair in the high school band and in the orchestra and the jazz band. And jazz was great, but I still really wanted to be a drummer in a rock band. So I, I was lucky. Sophomore year in high school, I was approached by three seniors that were pulling together a rock band and wanted to know if I would join them. So I'm like, yeah, I'm totally in. So it was kind of some heavy metal stuff with Ted Nugent and Rush and Black Sabbath and Aerosmith, all that kind of stuff. Had a little longer hair back then, but we played parties and played in Battle of the Bands. We're like in front of 1,200 people. So, it was just incredibly exhilarating. I took a break after college. Actually, I almost went into music instead of architecture or engineering at college. And then I realized maybe from a financial perspective, that wasn't the right choice. So I chose what I did, which I've got absolutely no regrets. But I still tinker with the drums on the side. It's been scaled back these days. I'm just playing a contemporary service at my church. But still have the dream of getting a band back together in retirement someday.
Oh, I like that. That's a great idea. Well, and so you mentioned Rush. I'm gonna. Is it? I'm gonna guess that Neil Peart may have been an influence.
Oh my gosh, yes, he was my idol. He is amazing. It was really sad about his passing last year, but there's actually somebody on YouTube that has put together a 24-minute compilation of every Rush song that Neil Peart ever played chronologically in order through, I think, the 12 different albums. And he's got a drum set around him. He needed every drum set that Neil had throughout his career. And so it's just like this 360-degree set of drums, which anybody that's interested in Rush or in drums, you got to check out that video.